Welcome to the Help Me, I'm Middle Age podcast. My name is Rob.
And I'm Rob too.
Hey, long time no see. We
Yeah.
are here today with a wonderful guest, Dr. Jonathan Wierzbicki. And before we get to him, we just want to address a few issues. We've sort of been on hiatus for a while. There's a
Sheltering in
virus,
place.
sheltering in place. There's like a little virus going around here that's really done a number on our country. And we decided that, you know what, we are going to have to figure out a new way to do the podcast, not in studio. So we're using another platform here and just trying to reach the audience in a different way because we can't do it the way we used to. And we got a phone call from Dr. John, and he was willing to come on and talk about his experiences as a practicing physician with what's going on and inform our audience, which we were very grateful for. And we just wanted to talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, it's very timely with what's all happening. And just,
absolutely.
Being what, eight weeks into it, 9 weeks into it.
So, and just so the audience knows, we are in New Jersey, so we're in what they call a hot zone. So there's been a lot of activity around here. I know a lot of parts of the country, they've been blessed, haven't seen a lot, but in New Jersey and the New York area, we've definitely, you start getting to that point where you know someone who knows someone, the 7 degrees of separation, it just gets closer and closer until you know people who've actually had it. So it's it's been a big deal around here. And
I think as of right now, Rob, it's been about 65 or 66,000 in the United States have passed away because of it. So point of reference also. That's
So, well, let's bring on Dr. Jonathan Wierzbicki, a physician in the Flemington, New Jersey area. And thanks for coming on, Doctor.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me again.
This is great.
This is awesome. So actually, to do some backtracking, this is our third podcast with Dr. John, and this is the first one that will be airing because we were sort of doing the podcast and having a few what they call in the can so we could roll them out. And your first two never rolled out yet because we just decided to stop everything because of what was going on. So now we're back up. So you'll see him in the future too on the Help Me, I'm Middle Age podcast.
Yeah,
so
great one on sleep.
That was yes, that was really good. That was really good. Yeah, that was good. So tell us a little bit about what has it been like being a physician, dealing with this. I was thinking to myself, it's one of these really strange things because unlike there's so much information out there and there's so much news on it. It's just constant. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone has an opinion on this. You walk into, I can imagine
politics is almost intertwined with it.
Yeah. Right.
Economics, science, and politics are all combined. Right.
Yeah. And you're on the ground trying to help the patients and, that type of stuff. So explain to us what the process has been like for you throughout this whole thing.
It's interesting. I've had a dual role. I'm a business owner of a small business and I'm a physician. So from the medical side, it's interesting in the very, very beginning. We've seen a number of, people think this is something that's brand new. We've never seen before. There's been pandemics through the years. Swine flu is the one you guys are probably most familiar with. Of course, Ebola a few years back. There was a measles outbreak last year. So there's a number of things that we're accustomed to. We kind of assumed that this was going to be like that. I don't think anyone in the medical community or any politician could have envisioned that in a modern America that this would have happened the way that it has. There's a few things that are unique about coronavirus. And actually, before I even start making any comments or statements about things, I try to when I teach students in my office, I talk about there's 3 categories of things. So there's the things that are just scientific fact. That are just indisputable. There are things that we don't know for certain, but based on the evidence we have and by precedent, we're pretty sure that this is correct. And then there are some things that are really just complete conjecture that we really don't have any evidence for, but we just kind of, some people think that it might be and some people don't. So I just want to kind of divide, the categories up like that. It's interesting. Some of the things let's go in the facts category first. What's different, the secret sauce of Corona, just to give an example to something that people like to compare it to, the flu, okay? Right now, the CDC in Atlanta is developing its vaccine for this coming fall that everybody gets, when, you know, September, October, and such. They try.
This is for the regular flu.
The regular flu. You know,
right.
This happens every year. They look across the world, they look in Asia and such, and they see what flu strains are there. Because, you know, your vaccine does not cover every strain. It's usually 2 A's, a B, and then the swine flu is usually included with it now as well. So they try to guesstimate, and some years they're very effective, and some years they're not. So when people say like the flu shot didn't work this year, I mean, they weren't able to actually guesstimate which strain was coming over. But that's a period of months and sometimes even a year. You know, this thing went from being in a small area in China to spreading throughout the world in like 2 months. There's not even time that you could even react to that, which is why like you're trying to play catch up at this point. And why, like early on, as I was talking to my employees and such, they were asking questions like, yeah, we've seen this before. You know, they'll contain it. Maybe a few cases will come over. There will be in like certain pockets of the country. We never expected to be as widespread as it did. It took everybody by surprise. And, you know, that's part of the reason we didn't have the ventilators necessarily available that we anticipated initially. And why a lot of politicians were a little bit like unsure initially and eventually then did the shutdown. So I'm actually kind of surprised in a modern America this would be possible. So it's been amazing. It's been scary for a lot of people. The other thing that's kind of interesting, that's so different. So the contagion level of this is very unusual. The second thing that's odd, again, just comparing to the flu, is that the flu looks for vulnerable patient populations. The very young. This is why if you're under 5 years old, it's recommended you get a flu shot. And of course, the elderly. Corona does not tend to target younger people. In fact, kids under 18 virtually have no problem whatsoever. They don't die. They do not have a death rate at all, rate of 0 actually. In addition, there's some studies that have come out saying that for younger people, like I'd say in school, will not transmit the virus to adults, which is of course very encouraging, talking about opening up schools in the future.
Yeah.
On the flip side, this with someone who is elderly, of course, everybody's heard about 80 and older and such, or you're in your 50s, 60s with risk factors. And actually, we could talk a little bit about which risk factors are worse than others because they're not all equal. It's really, it's got a lethality to it. Once it gets hold and begins the whole process of filling the lungs with fluid, it like very quickly, you know, puts you down. So then the other problem is that, you know, although the amount of death rate is debated right now, how many cases, like, you know, what's your chance if you get it that you'll end up dying? Is it 1%? Is it 2%? Is it 0.4%? The truth of the matter is this thing is so contagious, a lot of people are thinking that half the population is eventually going to get the virus itself. So even with a low death rate, and you start talking 0.4% or such, you're talking about a lot of people dying. And this is what really scared everybody initially. They were thinking, you know, perhaps, you know, hundreds of thousands of people would die. The worst epidemic that we've seen in the United States is the Spanish flu of 1918. 600,000 people had died during that. And you saw how scary that was with people in the World War I, you know, ticker tape parade in New York, they all have their masks on.
Right.
They were thinking this could actually be reaching levels like that. So it'd be like the first time in a century. Right now, there's much more encouragement than that. But initially, to answer your question, Rob, to go full circle, when it began to realize what was happening, I mean, I've never seen people so afraid, so scared. And of course, kind of like, it reminded me a little bit of 9/11 when it first happened, where you started hearing all these stories and rumors and things.
Right.
Same thing was happening with this. And, you know, I kept thinking like, well, they're not going to close the schools. And then they did. Oh, they're not going to close Las Vegas. And they did. I was like, wow, I couldn't believe it. It was remarkable. Now, at least I think we're kind of like, we've learned a lot in these last 2 months. And I think this is a time like the opening and such is, I think, appropriate for a lot of reasons, but we'll delve into that. So that's kind of my initial reaction.
Well, when I hear you talk about, like, because we've all been living this, I've said to myself, I've said it out loud, I've said it to a few people, I said, I feel like I'm in the middle of a Stephen King novel. Like I'm on chapter 4 at least, maybe going into chapter 5, and I really don't want to get to the end because it was like, no, they're not going to close schools when they close schools. There's no way the casinos close, they never close. Airplanes aren't going to run. Yeah, so like you start thinking like, wow, this is a Stephen King novel we're living in. So it is like as we're going through the last couple of weeks, several weeks, it's sometimes you don't realize you're in the middle of something that will define us for the rest of our lives. Like we will say before the virus and after the virus.
Yeah.
It was like before 9/11, after 9/11. You could like walk all the way up to the gate, meet your friend when he came off the plane, and you would, all that type of stuff that we used to be able to do. So it's definitely like what do they call just a life altering event that just changes everything for the future.
To relate to 9/11 again, one of the things that's remained to this day is I love the Yankees. I go to the Yankee games. Okay. They now have metal detectors to get in the game. And every time I see that, I think of 9/11. One of the subtle changes that I think will forever be the idea of a handshake with somebody. Because really the way this thing is transmitted is through touch and then touching yourself. So I me personally, the way, if you wanted to spread this disease, the way to do it is to have people shaking hands. So I think that's something that may actually be a pre-coronavirus thing. Where now we go to business meeting, and if you look at Asia, it's interesting. If you look at how to handle terrorism, they look at Israel because they deal with it every day. When it comes to this kind of pandemic, you look to Asia. They deal with it every day. Part of their culture is you don't shake hands with someone, you actually bow. Things like that may actually be incorporated later on. I think the handshake is something that will actually will go away. That they won't do that in business meetings and such. Now shaking 10 people's hands all at once.
Sure.
Yeah. Especially when you meet like a stranger or someone you're introduced to. That first thing you do, and you always tell your son, you shake that hand. You make sure you got a tight grip.
Yeah, it's going to be a little different now.
Yeah. You think the fist pump will go away too? It's all gone, huh?
That's here. We go. Oh, well, this go like this. Yeah. Actually, might.
Yeah, it's all
the contact. Yeah.
Oh Jesus.
Hey, John, what was the virus evolution for like your practice? What did you see over the weeks happening? Did you see any unique things within the practice?
Yeah. So initially, now we're getting into the I'm making my educated opinion. These are just my personal experience with the virus. People presented with some strange symptoms initially. Number one, they had a fatigue that was unusual. They were more tired than you would normally see. Then some of them complained about a lack of taste or smell. That was another thing that happened. And the third thing I noticed is that they would make a complaint that they didn't feel any appetite at all. They weren't throwing up, they weren't nauseous, they just didn't have an appetite. And those patients were like a few days into really getting sick. We've had a number of people hospitalized. We actually had one on a ventilator. They're all doing fine. And I've noticed that the acuity of symptoms here recently, I've noticed has gone down significantly. As you probably know, there was the ship, the Comfort, that's now left New York. The Javits Center doesn't have as many people. So that initial, going after the most vulnerable people and people really getting ill, initially was at a high. And that's where the scare was at the height. Part of this was I had employees, and I spoke with them. It was just one of the things I mentioned to them. I said, we deal with this every day. People come in all the time with HIV, hepatitis, the flu, meningitis. That's part of what we do. We have universal precautions, which is done, throughout. And I made a couple of changes in how we practice in the office. The last 2 months, not a single person with a respiratory symptom of any kind has entered my building. We will either see them via telehealth or we'll see them in the parking lot. And if I go in the parking lot, I'll actually gown. You wear the N95 mask, you get the gloves on, you go out to their car. And then when we come out, we take everything off, we clean up. So there's not been anybody in the office itself. So I've been outside in the rain, in the cold, in the wind. But, there's, as much as telehealth has been a significant weapon that we have, a tool that we can use, seeing someone live, especially some cases that I've seen where they're not getting better, I need vital signs, I need a pulse ox, I got to listen to their lungs. I have to see them up close. But of course, I can't bring them into my building. I have all my employees and of course other patients that might come in for whatever reason. You know, because like chest pain, abdominal pain, you can't evaluate that over the phone. You need, you need vital signs. You got to see some people.
Sure.
So that was one of the changes that we made. And it actually, the office, my staff has been great. You know, a lot of medical people, like, you know, you appreciate, you know, with all the insurance stuff and things, you remember why you're doing this. You know, it's like when everyone kind of runs, I almost equate it to the fireman in the fire. The fire happens, everybody runs away, but the firemen, it's their job to be there. So when this kind of thing happens, they look to us for guidance. They look to us, you know, that we're available. I mean, I can't tell you how many patients have said, thank you so much for being open. We have not closed a single day during this time.
Good.
Not a single day.
So, but not because of these precautions, you've been blessed where none of your employees no one's gotten sick from this.
Yeah. So as you guys are probably aware, another little secret sauce to this thing is that there's a prodrome time of a number of days, maybe as long as a week, where you don't present symptoms that you might have the virus, which is why everybody's masking to enter ShopRite and such. You know, it's interesting. You guys are not necessarily at risk for being, you know, for dying from it, although there's a percentage, but it's small. If you getting it from somebody who thinks they're healthy and they're not, and then giving it to somebody who's vulnerable. Just to segue for a second, half of the deaths and where it's most ravaged is in long-term care facilities. Nursing homes, assisted living, developmental center. I mean, when it gets in there, it's a disaster. It's just like, you know, so that's, you know, even with the prisons, they've been letting some of the prisoners out to try to, like, you know, so it's not as, that kind of contained setting. Somebody brings it in, that vulnerable population, and it's a mess. So,
That's crazy. So how have you noticed, as far as like your patients who have had it, have you spent a lot more time in contact with them over the phone as they're home, as they're convalescing, or do you like pass? I guess once they leave your office, if they have to go to the hospital, you sort of look to like they're on someone else's care. But have you had a lot more contact with the people who have been infected?
Yes, absolutely, and especially during, like, you know, in the month of March, and then, you know, probably halfway through April. You know, if you tell somebody you're positive for COVID, they're petrified. They think it's like to be a death sentence, basically. So, but a lot of them did not go to the hospital. In fact, you don't want them to go to the hospital. There's we got a bunch of vulnerable people all sitting around. So, I'd be in contact with them. They go back to their home. They do a serious quarantine for 14 days. That doesn't mean you go out to ShopRite with a mask on. You're home. People will take stuff to your house. And you can also presume that your family members should also be quarantined for that period of time as well. So that's the way we handle it. I counseled them. I was up to date with information. So I told them, you know, as we start getting clinical experience, I can tell them what to expect. You know, people really, I mean, that's when you're able to speak from an authority that you've actually seen cases and how they normally go. When a patient knows what's coming, it's comforting, as opposed to this unknown where none of us really had seen anything like this before. So yes, to answer your question, I certainly did.
Speaking about what
and more content,
you know, what's coming, the weather change. Is there any anticipation that that's going to be an effect, you know, that is positive?
Yeah, 100%. Not to get too scientific, but give a little bit of background. You know, the virus is actually not even a living thing. It's a bunch of RNA. That's part of the message proteins in your body that the genes are made from. The DNA is then translated to RNA, and it's surrounded by this lipophilic like membrane. Well, the membrane can only live for a certain amount of time, which is why, you know, it can only be on like surfaces for a number of hours or even up to like 3 days. Okay, and then the protein denatures and it just dissolves. So that's why, like when they talk about like washing your hands, detergents are great at breaking those lipid layers down. All right. A little example, if you're ever interested, you'll see like on the water, you'll see a little water skimmer bug. Okay, as the surface tension on the water.
Yeah.
Well, if you drop a little detergent, the thing will sink right into the water because all the membranes are just disappeared. So, you know, the bonds are broken. Same thing here with washing your hands. Another thing that kills it is the heat, the humidity. And that's why you'll see, like for flu, like July, August, you don't really see much because the heat, it really does a number on it. That's why there's going to be one of the challenges for the political people. And of course, this is just as the presidential race heats up. In September, October, when it gets colder again, there should be a spike up for this. So who knows what that spike could be? Again, people project it's going to be, not as bad as it was. It could be worse than it was. We don't really know. The smartest thing they're doing is if they reopen now, you'll actually get a little bit of that herd immunity beginning. That's when you have 60, 70% of people with antibody, the virus, which it necessitates having a host, it can't live independently, will not find enough people to infect, and it just tends to die off on its own. That ultimately is going to be the demise of this virus, is that because it's so contagious. You've seen the numbers in that little test we did in New York, 25% of people have it already. So as the summer goes into fall, and as they eventually get a vaccine, you will reach herd immunity levels, and the thing will just die off.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question. If you were a betting person, right, without the antibodies test available now, do you think you've had it and it's gone through you and you don't know for sure? But if you had to make a wager, do you think it came and gone because you had it or no?
I think I must have had it. I can't imagine. I mean, I know I've been in personal contact, like I said, with a couple dozen of these patients. So, and if it's as much as I do the precautions, and then people coming into the office, I can't imagine that I have not had it at some point. And, I have a story like everybody else. I remember back in February, I had this fatigue for a couple of days and a mild fever. And then it kind of went away. And I thought it was kind of strange, and now, and I think back, could that have been Corona potentially?
Right.
Well, my son felt like that back in late February, early March.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're thinking, have we had it? We don't even know. So
right.
I think the antibody test is going to be huge.
Going to get it, the wild strain.
Yeah. But as far as you were saying, that coming back, do you think with the policies that we have, our entire society has changed? So with the social distancing, with the wearing the mask, and when you go into retail places, with all of these policies that we put in place, our government, the suggestions, do you think it would lessen the effects moving forward if we were still strict with these policies?
So let me just kind of take a step back for a second. So there's a theory, and this kind of makes sense to me, that you guys have heard the whole flattening the curve thing. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. So the idea is, coronavirus is going to kill X number of people, let's say 100,000 people, okay? And is it going to do that in a month, or is it going to do that in 6 months? The idea is that these precautions we're doing, instead of the curve kind of going like this really quickly, it kind of flattens out like this over a longer period of time. The idea is our hospitals can only handle a certain number of patients. So Rob, to answer your question, and it's a little bit humbling when you think about this, all of the things that we're doing may not actually be preventing any infection per se. If you're going to get it, you're going to get it. It has flattened the curve out so that instead of everybody getting sick at the same time, it's been spread out. I can tell you that I personally think that, so there's a couple of things I think that are helpful, for sure. I think that washing of your hands and having the gloves on will certainly make a difference, okay, for sure. I think if you're sick, then you wear the mask to protect other people. As far as some of the other things, like they have the distancing, there's this idea that if I sneeze or cough, it's going to float in the air for 6 feet and land on somebody. Maybe that gives you some benefit, but I think it's on the smaller side. The other thing is they do the distancing with parks and things. Outdoors is actually it's a much safer environment than indoors. So the parks, I was not a big fan of. And especially as it gets hotter, people need that just psychologically. Then you get into the whole economics of it and the psychology of it. So I think that there'll be some effect in this, Rob, to answer your question. But you can make an argument that all of these measures are not going to necessarily help people that are vulnerable, which is why I actually think when they make the recommendation you should let the people that are not necessarily vulnerable back to work and school and such. But if you're someone who's a high-risk person, especially if you're over 70 or you have, your weight, diabetes and such, you should actually stay quarantined until we have herd immunity. If I was an 85-year-old diabetic and I had bad emphysema, I would continue to be quarantined.
Aside from age, what other issues should a person, if they're diabetic, high blood pressure, what other things should be considered as high risk?
So the order of things in importance that they've shown: age is number 1, diabetes is number 2, weight is number 3. They've mentioned other types of things, and obviously having emphysema is not helpful either, but hypertension and such, these are not as necessarily correlated as those 3. So yeah, age, weight, like obesity, diabetes are the big 3. In fact, there's been cases where you'll see a patient who has COVID, they'll go into the hospital and their sugars will jump into the thousands. It wreaks havoc. Yeah.
Is there a progression of, if you got COVID-19, you'll feel this first, then followed by that, or is it depending upon the person?
Yeah, I've noticed they usually start with a mild illness like a fever. They start with a fatigue. That goes on for 3-4 days. Then I've noticed that they tend to have that taste, lack of taste, and they're not that hungry. And then usually with like a day or 2 after that, if they're going to get that fulminant like fluid that builds up in the lungs, that's when it occurs. So it's usually a 5-6 day progression.
So do you think, like at my place of employment, you can't get in a door without getting your temperature checked? Do you think that's a good, just can't hurt? If you got a fever, go home.
Yeah, I think that's almost useless.
Really?
Because of the prodrome. The guy with 102 fever, so the prodrome is that period of time before you're actually ill that you have the virus and you're transmitting it. That's one of those, It looks good, like you're trying to do things to help, but there's nothing scientific about it in my opinion. Sure, if you have a fever, sure, they can prohibit you from going in. But, there could be 90% of cases that they don't have any symptoms at all, and they have no fever, so they just walk right in. So I don't think that's going to do much of anything.
What about getting a test? My wife is going to get a blood test for something else, and it's going to fold in the other test for COVID-19. What would come from that as far as the knowledge you've had it, and then what do you do with that?
Yeah.
Sort of.
So that is, obviously the vaccine is the holy grail. Right. But next to that is the serology. If you had COVID and you have antibody, not only can you not get it, but you also can't transmit it because you're now immune. You're now immune to it, so you can be exposed. It's like someone who had chicken pox. They have immunity, and then you're able to go with people that have chicken pox, and you're fine. So there's 2 issues potentially. The first issue is you're immune, but for how long? Is it lasting a month? Does it last a year, a lifetime? They don't exactly know yet. But if you look at, it's not like we don't have any. This is like this middle category where we can make an intelligent decision on it. Most times, if you've got immunity, it lasts years. A decade maybe at the minimum, and very potentially for an entire lifetime. The one confounding factor right now with the current tests is coronavirus actually is very common. Rhinovirus, right. The colds that people have, this is a novel coronavirus, novel COVID-19. So what happens is if you've got antibodies to coronavirus, it's sometimes hard to tell, was it from a previous coronavirus infection that wasn't the novel one, or is it the current one? Because, the nightmare is you get the blood testing, it looks like you're immune, and you say, oh, you're fine. And actually, you're not.
Right.
So they're right now, they're getting the test out as fast as they could. We've now started testing some patients in the office. I'm not 100% sure of the reliability yet. But
you got that Abbott machine in your office?
No, this is where we send it out to the lab.
Oh, okay. Got
That's supposed to be the better version. There's the acute testing with the nasal swab. Those are very accurate. Those are very good. The ones of the blood testing, though, they're not entirely sure the reliability of it quite yet. So I'm not recommending to patients to necessarily rely on that data. Although if the test is negative, the hope is that that really does show that you are still susceptible. So at least you know that going forward. If it's positive, then that might mean that you've had it and might have immunity to it. They're going to get better. They're going to get, as the weeks go on, the testing is going to get much better.
So as a physician, you know, we live in a social media world. Everyone's on their phones constantly. It's, you know, with the clickbait journalism that's out there, you know, if you put this name in the title, you're going to get clicks, which is going to add to revenue. Now, with all that information, there's, you know, sensation, you know, it's not always the most, that's the word I'm looking for. It's not always the most accurate information. Then your patient comes into you, and now you have to spend part of your valuable time, because you have a lot of patients to see, debunking what this clickbait thing was that they clicked on, and they saw this little article, and it had this, like, there was this one case in outer Mongolia, and then they wrote like
they have me read the article sometimes too.
Right. You have to go through everything that you know is on the front lines dealing with. What is that like? I mean, is that like, you know, oh my God.
You know what, like, first of all, you know, obviously we don't have the same volume we normally do, so I have a little extra time between patients.
Oh, okay.
Just fine. We haven't picked it up recently, but, you know, I've had extra time. I actually don't mind that. I almost feel like it's my job. You know what, like, you know, if it makes you know, a few people each day feel more comfortable about what's going on and such, like it's almost a relief to them. I get a lot of satisfaction out of it. It doesn't, I know it sounds strange. I'm sure some people it's kind of it annoys a bit, but forget the insurance companies and the paperwork. It was just me in the room talking to patients all day, I would love it. Be great.
Right. That's
what's the, besides yourself, what's the definitive place to turn to for information that you would recommend?
So I think the CDC is one of the best places to look. They have every single day they go through and update information about what's happening. You know, a lot of this is statistics. So when you start looking at the ebbs and flows, you can see how many new cases were diagnosed. So that depends on testing. How many deaths are there? You know, although there's some question about, like, you know, someone had a heart attack and they have pneumonia and they have COVID. What was the cause of death? Right now it's all lumped into COVID. So is that accurate or not? But, you know, if they're using the same barometer each time, that's a great source of information what's happening nationally. There's a couple of other sources that I'll use for, like, the local Jersey numbers and by county. But cdc.gov it's very conservative, science-based, numbers-based approach to this. I think it's a great resource.
Okay, that's good.
So with people not coming into your office for a you know, their knee is a little hurt, or like, you know what, I'll suck it up, I got a twisted ankle, you know, whatever you normally get, right? People are like, hey, I'm not going to the doctor, which I kind of think may be a problem down the line we're not seeing yet, because, you know, that early diagnosis sometimes saves you later. So I'm sure that'd be an issue they'll be talking about 6 to 9 months from now. But how has that affected your business?
Yeah, so initially, you know, again, this is part of, you don't know what's happening in the future. You know, we were down 50-60% with volume. We're now down, I'd say, about 30% with volume.
Okay.
Luckily, we've been very smart with the business. We don't have a lot of debt. I have the mortgage. That's it.
Right.
My staff, I've really tried to maintain a bit of normalcy with them. So I've not let anybody go. We've trimmed our hours a little bit, but not much. And I reassure my employees, I'm like, you know, these will be the hours going forward. No one's getting cut. So, I mean, it's like a side, you know, my team has been great. It's you know, it takes years to build up your team of people. I mean, they are just, their commitment, they understand what we're doing. If I said, listen, guys, I have to make it a half day every day, they'd be fine with it. They feel proud about what they're doing. It's been tough. You know, there's the whole PPP loan that you probably have heard about, which through Bank of America was difficult initially, for sure. I've actually been approved for it, and they're supposed to be giving it to me in a couple of days or so. But, you know, 2 months have gone by. So luckily, I've been fortunate enough. So right now, to answer your question, we're actually treading water. So there's no bonuses or anything. going, for next year, but we're treading water. And I am like thankful and feel blessed to even be in that situation, because there's a lot of people that is not the case.
Yeah, I mean the economic, and Rob maybe will speak to this through his background, the economic hardship that people, I mean, there's so many good people that are just getting completely wiped out, and it's so sad. And I mean, we need to think about the people who have passed away totally, but for the people that are left here, it's just, you hear story after story, it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, the economy is definitely going to be affected by it, and there's going to be a lot of casualties along the way. If you, John, if you had to paint like a best case picture that you saw, I don't want to say the economy doing things, coming back on, but if you could paint the picture of a good situation or best situation versus not the worst case scenario, but a much worse case scenario, can you paint and say like, well, okay, 2 months from now, if everything seems to be going in a good direction, most businesses should be okay to open up again, and gradual sort of reintroduction of the way we did things, hopefully we'll continue to go in that direction.
Sure. So Sweden actually had, they didn't really close everything down. They had all the younger people together to get herd immunity, and they're trying to see what's happening in that scenario. So if Sweden is correct, as we reopen, I'll paint a rosy picture to start, right? So we're all together. Some people will get some COVID, but the vulnerable people in general will not, especially if they stay away. We'll get more and more immunity. And I think by the summertime, by like July or so, you'll see the number of cases drop significantly. Then, of course, if testing gets better, we know who's immune. And shortly after that, a vaccine comes. By 2021, this might be just something, remember when? Remember when coronavirus was around? That is actually, it's not even rosy. That actually could very well happen. Here's the other side of things. We're thinking that so many people have had it so far, but maybe this distancing we've done, a lot of people have not had it yet. And as we try to reopen, now people start getting reinfected again. You start seeing the rates start to go up again. And then what do? Do you shut the economy down again? So, and then of course, the idea that a vaccine may take 18 months. So you could be talking about like things not getting normal really even to like next summer. So you could be talking a situation where like 18 months or so where things are still trying to come around, which I can't even imagine not only the number of deaths at that point, it may be approaching 500,000, but then the economic toll that would take. So, that would be like the grim situation if that was to happen. But I'm optimistic. I really think that the fact that it's so contagious is going to really be its demise ultimately. It just stinks now, but 2-3 months from now, that actually might be to our benefit.
Right. So, I mean, believing that the best course of action is to get us out there, get us the herd immunity, and kind of build up that resistance as time goes by.
Yeah, I think we have to, first of all, you can't separate the financial part of it. The average business has about 28 days of surplus, and the average American has about $3,000 reserved. So like at this point, like they've gone through the reserve. The businesses are it's like if you don't do it now, if you wait another month, there's going to be even more devastation from it. And the idea, like I said, I think that Sweden has something to it, that herd immunity will actually, in the long run, make all the difference in the world. I think it's important. Yeah.
It's so strange. So, like when Georgia first opened up, we were like, okay, well, they're the petri dish.
Yeah.
If it goes bad, we'll know about it really quick. Sweden is another petri dish. It's a gigantic experiment. They're doing everything. They're going their own direction. They got their own theories, right? So, I mean, we will see data from both data sets. We'll see what's going on in Georgia, and we'll see what's going on in Sweden. And a couple months from now, we'll be able to see, hey, they were right, they were wrong.
Yeah, exactly, Rob. And it's interesting who's got the right approach. I mean, even our states have different plans. And
right.
even the opening of Disney World is different than Disneyland, because California and Florida have different policies. This is
right.
They are making it up as they go, which is why the information has been so varied. I mean, it's really been, as you probably know, remdesivir was just approved as
Yeah,
a treatment, a
Gilead,
real
right?
treatment. It was all that hydroxychloroquine stuff for a while.
Right,
It's
right,
really
right.
shown in studies not to be effective. Well, that was what was touted. I had patients just calling, just asking for the drug. They're not even symptomatic.
Yeah.
They just want it.
Wow.
I'm like, wait a minute. That's not a drug you just like pick up at the Walmart.
Right,
There's some
right,
serious
right.
consequences to that. So it took a while for us to figure out, like, you heard like blood pressure medicine was bad for you. No, losartan is good for you. So people,
Right.
Rob, people coming in and asking me, I almost have to like daily get updates so I know to give up to date information to people when they're asking me. So
Jeez. It was like the Advil Tylenol thing.
yeah,
I, I
yeah.
heard one report against that said something negative against Advil, and let me just say, because I have no idea. I haven't taken Advil since. I have a little headache. I take Tylenol. Right. I have no idea if it's true or not, but you hear that one little thing, and it changes your behavior.
So to give a little bit, this is where, again, in the middle, where we don't have the exact data, but precedent gives us some information. So
Right.
the entity with Rise syndrome and aspirin, this is with children. If they take an aspirin and they get a viral infection, it can actually have devastating effects on the liver. So NSAIDs have been known to do this with viruses. So the no Advil recommendation is a good one. Tylenol does
Okay.
not do that. So while there's no studies, that's a very, I think, good approach based on what we've known previously. So I would agree with that. No Advil or aspirin, that's what I've been recommending. And
Just
Tylenol
Tylenol.
would be the preferred choice, yes.
It's crazy.
Hey, how about like daily routines? Like the getting of the mail is a ritual for my wife that comes with a Lysol can, gloves,
Yes.
and I think a hazmat suit at this point.
Yeah.
But is there anything that we should be doing at home as we reintroduce ourselves into the community? I mean, things like mail. In your opinion, is there a reason to, douse it with Lysol, let it sit out in the garage for half an hour and then open it? Or
I have an
other things
idea
like
about that.
Yeah.
I have an idea about that. I have to go ahead, John, but I have a non-scientific.
Well, I'm curious to hear your idea.
So my aunt lives in Palm Springs, right? And she's in her 70s, and she's very, very concerned about this. So she's got a whole thing with the mail too. So I was thinking to myself, it's paper. If there was a live virus on it, what happens if you threw it in a microwave for 20 seconds? Like if I put a paper towel in the microwave for 20 seconds, nothing happens to it. But if there was a virus on there, it would have to die, right? So that's my non-scientific thought.
That's interesting. Okay. That's one, I've not heard that solution before.
You probably won't.
There's things like the post office could like have UV light run over it to try to sterilize it on the same kind of principle. But the virus does not live on all surfaces the same amount of time. The virus wants something that's like metal or plastic and cold. So for instance, a counter is how it wants to live. When you start talking about like paper, that's not an ideal environment for the virus. So the thought is that it does not live 3 days on a piece of mail. It's significantly less. A day, maybe at the most, maybe even less. Because remember, it's got to have a host. So it's understood that mail does not seem to be a major transmitter. So I don't think that's necessary. I mean, if you want to have gloves on, you can, but I think even that's not necessary. You know what the truth of the matter is? Go out to the mail, open it up, do your business. When you're done, wash your hands. And I think that's absolutely adequate.
Okay. Yeah. I'll tell my wife that, see what kind of behavioral changes happen because of that.
Right.
So here we go. We're in May. We're recording this the beginning of May, and they just opened up the parks in New Jersey today. And now we're going to come in Memorial Day, and like even on the roads today, I was out this morning. I mean, a lot of people are out compared to previous Saturdays. So the people they've got fatigue from being locked up. I mean, they want out, and it's going to be very interesting to see how this all plays out as the weather starts to break here in the northern part of the country,
Yeah, absolutely. It's time, just psychologically, but I also think with we have definitely made an impact with the locking down. So I think this is, and the weather's getting nicer. I think all the factors and the economic stuff I talked about, I think it's all kind of lining up that you have to do it at some point. You have to do it, and then we're going to learn, like you're saying, this is the experiment. This is the petri dish. We're going to see what happens. We have predictions. Like I said, I'm hopeful. I think this is the right move, except unless you are elderly or high risk. Those patients, like, for instance, I have parents that are in their 70s.
Yeah.
And I'm actually recommending them, like, you need to stay home. Don't start going out because everyone's opening up. They may have to wait a while.
And don't interact with younger people even, or?
Yeah, that's the problem, is they're a conduit. So, for instance, when I see my parents, they don't necessarily have to wear a mask, but I do, because I don't want to bring it to them. And we can keep a distance just to be safe.
Right. And that'll go on until.
I will go in their house, like touching, things, here and there. Yeah.
Right. So that'll exist until a vaccine, I guess, is the next logical thing, so that they don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, I think legally they're going to open it up for anybody who wants to. That's just my opinion based on like who is truly at risk for this.
Yeah.
So they closed the schools, but the truth is, if your teachers are younger, I know some are older, but if you have younger teachers and a bunch of students, they're really not at risk. But, for people who are older, they will absolutely be at risk, especially when the opening first happens, because you have to wait a week or two to see what happens to the cases.
Right.
So this time coming up, these next couple of weeks, for an older person is actually a bit of a risky time.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
well, Rob,
interesting.
You got anything else there, Rob?
No, this has been, as usual, John, very enlightening.
Very enlightening.
And we sound positive, though. I think we do sound pretty positive going forward.
Yeah, I am. I have a lot of, fear is such a powerful force.
Huge.
You start going like, people say, well, can it be on my shoes, and can it be on a leaf, and the leaf blows here and the ant takes it over here. I've heard all kinds of stories. And it just keeps going. But the truth of the matter is, we have evolved on this planet over hundreds of thousands of years, even millions of years, with our immune system. So, this, as they say in Peter Pan, this has all happened before. It has happened before in other gradations. We just, never thought in 2020 we'd still be as vulnerable that something like this can happen.
Yeah,
we will fight through this. I think we'll be wiser for the wear going forward. And I think with some of the changes and stuff that we'll be implementing, like I said, like no handshakes going forward potentially.
Sure.
I actually do feel optimistic, Rob. I do. I think we'll get normal life again, sooner rather than later.
And the other thing, like if you're looking at this in 36,000 feet, and you have the advantage of time, right, over the next several decades coming up, this may have prevented something much worse coming down the pike, because we're going to have monitoring systems, we're going to have behavior changes, like the next little virus that decides to kick up and starts moving around next couple of years, because there will be more in the future, right? Maybe with that early detection globally, because nobody wants to suffer this again, we may have diverted something in the future that of course we can't see right now.
A lot of that I think you're going to see. You just can't see now for where we are.
Talking about like death rates, smallpox has a death rate about 70%. Okay, that's about as bad as you could possibly think of. Vaccines are very effective against it. Will a superbug come along where the vaccine is not effective and it's still 70% and such? I agree with you, Rob, that having gone through this, we'll be able to react and contain it
quicker.
Give you a great example. You probably heard this stat before. Again, not to start, blaming this and that, but if China had acted differently, it's theorized that 95% of cases would have been prevented worldwide.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just with some early intervention of knowing what to do.
Well, it definitely puts it on the radar screen that it's a possibility. So if nothing else, we've become much more aware of it. So that's, I think, important.
We're countries trying to develop a superbug. That's another theory to this. Is that it actually came from, because we have bioterrorism programs, and we do, the Russians do, the Chinese do. So there's a question of whether this was just naturally occurring, or was it the scientist and his girlfriend? You know, you hear all kinds of stories.
It goes back to my Stephen King novel.
That's right, exactly.
That goes back to my
You need
Stephen
that for
King
the movie,
novel.
Rob. To make
gotta
it, you got to have that plot element.
Oh, I'm sure.
You got to get that in there. You know, they're in chapter 8. Where do you see chapter 8? It's unbelievable.
I think John could do Fauci. I think John could play Fauci, couldn't he?
Oh,
He
yeah,
could play Fauci on this.
You're an actor, John. You could do Dr.
Just get the hair a little bit
Absolutely.
more gray.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
There you go.
Absolutely.
A little bit of a Queen's accent. You could do that.
Yeah,
You know
there
what
you
I mean?
go.
Yeah.
If I'm English, it sounds much more proper.
Yes.
I'm sophisticated.
Yeah. Well, we want to thank you so much for coming on the Help Me on Middle Age podcast. We'd like to ask the audience, if you found any value here, please scroll down below, hit the subscribe button, share on your social media feeds. We're just trying to really have good conversations, build up a little bit of an audience, and share some really good information. Help Me on Middle Age podcast. So we really appreciate the support all of you have given us. So once again, thank you, Dr. Wierzbicki, for coming out. Really appreciate it.
Good job.
Really appreciate it. And until next time, take care, guys. Bye-bye.